Okay, so today we're really diving into something I think a lot of our listeners are going to be into: classic and modern cars.
Yeah.
The market, what's hot, what's not, and we've got some really interesting stuff to look at today from Piston Heads and CarCare Masters down in Dallas Fort Worth.
Yeah, that's right. And it's really cool to kind of get both perspectives. You've got the online enthusiast world with piston heads, and then you've got these guys who are actually, working on these cars every single day, seeing what people are bringing in, what's needing to be fixed.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just about fixing them; it's about is this car actually worth restoring? Is it appreciating in value? Is it something that people even want anymore?
Right. And I think that's a really important question because you can have all the enthusiasm in the world online, but if it doesn't translate to, actual dollars and cents, then
It's just a hobby.
yeah, exactly.
So, Piston Heads, they recently put out this list of 10 cars to watch in 2025, and they've got it broken down into these three categories: classics, which are anything pre-1985. Modern classics, which they say, those are the cars that were on all the millennial bedroom walls.
Right.
And then future classics, which are anything post 2010. So they're looking at, what's been popular on their site over the last year. They're also pulling some data from Classic Val. And, we always got to say this isn't financial advice,
Of course.
but it's just some really cool observations on what's catching people's attention.
Yeah, and I think that breakdown into those three categories really kind of shows you how, different generations are relating to these cars and how that affects their value.
Absolutely. So let's start with the classics. And their budget pick here is the Peugeot 205 GTI, specifically the 1.9. And they're talking about a budget of around 30,000 pounds for this.
Okay.
And, their reasoning, and it makes total sense. It's lightweight, it's nippy, and this is a big one. It's analog. People really want that pure driving experience these days. And it seems like the popularity of this car is definitely on the rise now. The 1.6 versions, they're a little bit more accessible, generally between 5,000, 15,000 pounds, though some are pushing that 30,000 pound mark, and one even sold on Piston Heads auctions for about 9,000 pounds.
No.
The 1.9s, though, those are a little bit more pricey. They're usually in the 10,000 to 20,000 pound range. But get this, there was a low mileage early example that went for 69,000 pounds at an auction in France.
Wow. That's quite a jump.
Yeah, so what does that tell you about the market for these little Peugeot?
I think it's definitely a car that's on the up. That price difference between the 1.6 and the 1.9. It's partly about supply and demand, but it's also about people who know these cars. They know that the 1.9 is just that little bit more special, that little bit more power, that little bit more engagement, and they're willing to pay for it.
Got that enthusiast knowledge, right?
Exactly. And I think that 69,000 pound figure, that really shows you that if you've got a really good example, like, low mileage original condition, these cars can become seriously valuable.
Yeah, it's that originality that's really appealing these days. All right, so moving into the mid-tier classics, we're talking around six figures here, and Piston Heads has picked the Datsun 240Z, or the Fairlady Z as it's known in Japan.
Right.
And these are actually pretty rare in the UK. Apparently only about 2,000 of the 168,000 that were produced ever made it over there.
Huh.
And it's kind of surprising because they're beautiful cars. That straight six engine. And they were reportedly better built than a lot of their European rivals at the time. But because they're so rare now, they become super popular with tuners.
Right.
And that means that if you've got a good original one, it's worth a lot of money. Now prices have doubled. In the last decade, they were going for around 10,000 to 20,000 pounds. And now you're looking at 20,000 to 30,000 pounds. And if it's been, nicely modified by a tuner, you can get over 100,000 pounds for one of these.
Wow, that's a big jump.
It is. So what do you think about the impacts of the tuner market on these cars?
I think it's really interesting because you've got these cars that were, great platforms for modification. They had good bones, and, as they got older, a lot of them ended up getting modified or they weren't as well taken care of. So when you find a really good original one, it's like a diamond in the rough.
Yeah, that originality is it's really a premium these days.
It is, and I think that's reflected in those prices.
Okay, so now we're going to the sky's the limit. Classic. We're talking seven figures and above. And Piston Heads has gone with the Lamborghini Miura.
Nice.
Now, this is interesting because we've seen some of those, really high-end 60s Italian V12 supercars, like certain Ferraris, they've actually cooled off a bit in the market recently.
Right.
But the Miura seems to be holding strong, if not appreciating even further.
Right.
So 50s and 60s cars, overall, they saw about a 10% drop in price in 2024 compared to 2023. But the base Miura has actually tripled in value in the last decade. It was around 500,000 pounds 10 years ago, and now it's sitting at about 1.5 million. And the MS and SV models, those are even more desirable. They're going for 2 million plus, and there was even an ex-Jota Recreation that sold for 4 million pounds last year.
That's incredible.
And it's also worth noting that Lamborghini as a brand saw the biggest price increase across all manufacturers in 2024. So what is it about the Miura that just makes it, stand the test of time like that, especially compared to some of its contemporaries?
Oh, I think the Miura is just one of those cars that it really defined the supercar genre. It wasn't just fast, it was beautiful, that mid-engine layout, the Bertone design. It was just revolutionary for its time. And I think that historical significance combined with the fact that they didn't make that many of them and just the overall, the Lamborghini brand.
The cachet.
Yeah, it just has the staying power. And the fact that Lamborghini as a whole is doing really well, it's kind of like all the boats are rising with the tide, and the Miura is definitely benefiting from that.
Yeah, it's like the OG supercar in a lot of ways.
It really is.
So before we move on to the modern classics, Piston Heads, they threw in a rogue classic to watch, and that is the Jaguar XJS. Now, according to their data, it's not exactly flying off the shelves right now.
Okay.
But they make a good case for why it might be one to watch. First of all, a lot of them were sold, but the condition of the ones that are left varies wildly. Some of them are great, some of them are,
Projects.
Yeah, exactly. And the folks over at TWR, Tom Walkinshaw Racing, they're actually buying up a lot of the rougher ones for their Supercat project, although they say they're only using the parts that are still good. And maybe most interestingly for people who watch the market, Chris Harris, and he's a pretty influential guy in the car world.
Oh, yeah.
He just bought an XJS.
Interesting.
So that could have an effect on things. Now, the market overall is kind of similar to where it was in 2021, but some of the variants have actually dropped in price by double-digit percentages. But social media chatter around the XJS is apparently on the rise, so that could be a good sign.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can't underestimate the Chris Harris effect. When somebody like that who has that much credibility and enthusiasm, when they get behind a car, people notice. And, TWR getting involved with the Supercat project, that adds a layer of intrigue as well. It's like maybe there's more potential there than people realize.
Yeah, it's kind of a sleeping giant, maybe.
Perhaps.
All right, so let's move into the modern classics. Those cars that really resonated with a whole generation of people who grew up seeing them on posters, and in the budget category, again, around 30,000 pounds. Piston Heads has chosen the Renault Sport Clio 182.
Okay, a hot hatch.
Yeah, proper hot hatch. And the trophy model with the sack stampers, that's the one that's really collectible now. They can go for around 20,000 pounds. You can still find them for closer to 10,000 pounds. And some are even as low as 6,000 pounds. The base 182s, they average around 5,000 pounds, but they actually doubled in price since before the pandemic, which it's pretty crazy. The trophy prices haven't quite gone up as much, but they're still going up. For example, a high mileage 182 trophy sold for 9,000 pounds on Piston Heads auctions, while a similar mileage 182 Cup went for just 5,500 pounds. So why do you think that base 182 has seen such a big jump?
Well, I think the base 182, it just hit that sweet spot. It was a really affordable, fun little car when it was new, and it's got that reputation for being a great driver's car. So as people are getting nostalgic for those, simpler times, the base 182, it's kind of become this icon.
Yep, it's that pure hot hatch experience.
Exactly. And the trophy model, it was always a little bit more niche, a little bit more expensive. So while it's desirable, it hasn't seen that same kind of mass appeal.
Okay, so into the mid-tier modern classics, we're talking around six figures here, and we've got the Lotus Carlton.
Ah, the Lotus Carlton.
Now, this car was a serious statement back in 1990. It was the world's fastest production saloon, and it's been hugely popular with enthusiasts for a long time. But just last year, one sold at auction for 111,000 pounds. Which is,
wow.
Yeah, it's crazy now. Just 10 years ago, you could pick one up for around 20,000 pounds. But today, the average is more like 50,000 to 60,000 pounds. And as we saw, some are going for way more than that. So what do you think accounts for this, this sustained and significant rise in value?
Well, I think the Lotus Carlton is just one of those cars that it really captured people's imaginations. It's this unassuming Vauxhall Carlton that they took and they injected it with all this Lotus engineering, and it became this monster.
Like a sleeper.
Exactly. It was ridiculously fast, and it was just so unique. And I think the combination of everyday usability and that supercar performance. It just gave it this legendary status, and they didn't make a lot of them, so they're rare.
Yeah.
And that just adds to the desirability. And I think those high auction prices, they just reflect, how much people love these cars.
They're special.
They are.
Okay, and for the sky's the limit, modern classic, we're talking Ferrari Enzo.
Ah, of course.
Now, PistonHeads acknowledges that there are other supercars that could fit in this category, like the Maserati MC12 or the Lamborghini Reventon. But the Enzo has seen a really big surge in interest on their platform in the last couple of years. And it's not hard to see why you've got that naturally aspirated V12, which a lot of purists consider to be the pinnacle of engine design. It's named after Enzo Ferrari himself. It was developed with Michael Schumacher. And maybe most importantly, it doesn't have that complex and potentially expensive hybrid system that its successor has.
Right.
So 5 years ago, they were trading for around £2 million. Now most are going for around £3.5 million. And they are super sensitive to mileage. And the low mileage ones in Nero, which is black, those are the most desirable. Some people are even repainting them black to try to get that look. And apparently you also have to be really careful with the launch control, because if you use it too much, it can actually damage the clutch.
Oh, wow. So it's a bit of a delicate flower.
Yeah, you got to be careful with it.
Yeah.
So why do you think that lack of a hybrid system is seen as such a positive for collectors?
Well, I think for a lot of collectors, particularly those who really appreciate that traditional driving experience, the fact that the Enzo doesn't have all that hybrid stuff, it's a big plus. It makes the car simpler mechanically, which, potentially means less to go wrong down the line. And it's just that pure connection between the driver and the engine. There's no electric motors or batteries to get in the way. And I think the Enzo represents that kind of a golden era before hybridization became so common in these top-tier performance cars.
It's a purest dream in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's shift gears again and look at the future classics. These are the cars from 2010 onwards. And in the budget category, around £30,000, PistonHeads has picked the Toyota GR Yaris.
Okay, the GR Yaris, I've heard good things.
Yeah, it's been getting a lot of praise, and it was actually voted their best hot hatch of the last 25 years.
Wow, that's high praise.
Yeah, it is, and it was built with rallying very much in mind, although it never actually competed officially because of regulation changes. But it's got all-wheel drive, rally-derived technology, a really punchy 3-cylinder turbo engine, and it's holding its value incredibly well. Early 2021 cars are still trading for around 80% of their original price, which is crazy compared to the usual 40% drop that most new cars experience.
That's impressive.
The prices range from £25,000 to $35,000 depending on age and mileage. And a low mileage example sold on PistonHeads auctions for £27,000 now for people who might be getting a little bit tired of all the GR Yaris hype.
Yeah, it's been everywhere.
They got another suggestion, and this one's interesting. The BMW i8. Yeah, so it's a decade old now. Some are selling for under £35,000, and they still look incredible.
Yeah.
Very futuristic, and they were quite technologically advanced for their time.
Yeah.
So do you see the i8 becoming a future classic, even though it's, it's a different kind of performance car?
I think it definitely could. The i8, when it came out, it was such a head turner. Those looks, that hybrid technology, it was really ahead of its time. And I think as people are looking back, at that era of early high-performance hybrids, the i8 is going to stand out as something really special.
Yeah, it was a statement car for sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, so moving into the mid-tier future classics, we're talking around 6 figures here, and we've got the Porsche 997 GT2 and the even more hardcore GT2 RS. Now, the 997 Generation 911 GT3s. Those are super popular.
Right, the Mesger engine.
Yeah, they're the last ones with that hydraulic steering and that amazing Mesger engine. But the 997 GT2s, they're the ones that are really climbing in value right now, kind of like what happened with the 996 GT2.
Yeah, those prices went crazy.
Yeah, and in the U.S., prices are really taking off for the 997 GT2, but in the UK, it hasn't been quite as dramatic over the last 10 years. They were going for £90,000 to £140,000 then, and now it's more like £100,000 to £150,000, the GT2 RS. That's another story. Those are going for $250,000 to £350,000, so double the price of the regular GT2.
Yeah.
So the big question is, will the UK market eventually catch up to the US?
Yeah, it's interesting how you see these regional differences. Sometimes a car will take off in one market and then it takes a while for the rest of the world to catch on.
Yeah, there are so many factors at play, right? Like import duties and, just different enthusiast cultures.
Exactly. And I think in the case of the 997 GT2, the US market, they really love that raw power. And the GT2 is a much more powerful powerful car than the GT3, so it makes sense that it would be more desirable there, but who knows? Maybe the UK will catch up.
Yeah, time will tell. Okay, so finally, the sky's the limit, future classic, and we have the Lexus LFA.
Lafayette.
Now, this one's interesting because when it first came out, it was a bit misunderstood. It was Lexus's first supercar, and I think people didn't really know what to make of it. But as time has gone on, collectors have started to realize just how special it is. That carbon fiber body, that screaming V10 engine, it's really something else. And prices are reflecting that they're approaching 1 million pounds now. Before the pandemic, they're averaging around 350,000 pounds. There was one outlier sale in the U.S. that went for $886,000. But now 700,000 pounds seems to be the going rate, and the even more track-focused Nürburgring edition, those can go for 1.5 million. Brand prestige definitely plays a role here. You know, Lexus's next most expensive car is the LC500, and that's in a totally different price bracket.
Right.
But the LFA, it's still a bit divisive in terms of its styling. Some people love it, some people hate it. But for those who are thinking about spending that kind of money, piston heads suggest maybe looking at the Lamborghini Murcielago SV. It's got that classic V12 and that poster car appeal. And it's likely to keep appreciating with younger collectors who, grew up seeing those cars.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The Murcielago it's a safe bet in a lot of ways.
It is. So what do you think it is about the LFA that took people a while to kind of come around to?
Well, I think the LFA was just so different.
Yeah.
For Lexus to come out with a supercar like that, it was a bold move, and it wasn't just about being the fastest. It was about the engineering, the attention to detail, that incredible sound. And I think it just took people a while to understand that Lexus wasn't trying to be Ferrari or Lamborghini. They were trying to do something completely unique. And I think as time has gone on, people have started to appreciate that.
Yeah, it was a statement car.
It really was.
Okay, so before we wrap up the piston heads perspective, they also included a rogue category. And this one's pretty broad. It's everything Japanese from the 80s and 90s.
Oh, yeah.
So we saw those cars go crazy during COVID.
Yeah.
The Supras, the Imprezas, the Evos, the RX-7s, the GTRs, prices went through the roof. But in the last couple of years, the market has cooled off a bit, reportedly by about 10% year on year.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So for people who maybe missed out on that initial boom, this could actually be a good time to buy.
Yeah, I think so. That market correction, it was probably inevitable. Those prices were getting pretty unsustainable, but it's not like those cars are any less desirable. So if you've been waiting for things to calm down a bit now, might be a good time to jump in.
Yeah, it's all about timing.
Yeah, it really is.
Okay, so let's switch gears now and get a different perspective this time from the experts over at CarCare Masters down in Dallas-Fort Worth. Now, these guys, they've got over 2 decades of experience restoring classic cars. So they've got a really good sense of what's hot and what's not, especially in their local market.
Yeah, that local perspective is so important. You can talk about national trends, but every region is a little bit different.
Exactly. So according to CarCare Masters, some of the rising stars, the cars that they're seeing increasing interest and value in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, include the 1969-1970 Ford Mustang Boss 429, and those have seen a huge jump in value, going from around $200,000 to upwards of $400,000.
Wow, that's significant.
It is. And their reasoning is the same as what we heard from piston heads. They're rare, they're powerful, and they're historically significant. Proper muscle car icon.
Yeah, the Boss 429, it's a legend.
It is. They also highlighted air-cooled Porsche 911s, specifically those models produced before 1998. And they're seeing those steadily rise in value because of that timeless design and that classic air-cooled driving experience. Even the more basic models are seeing price increases. So what do you think it is about those early 911s that makes them so enduring?
Well, I think it's that purity, those air-cooled engines, that mechanical simplicity. You really feel connected to the road and the car, and as they get older and more people experience them, that appreciation just keeps growing.
Yeah, it's that analog feel that people are really craving these days.
Exactly.
And maybe a little bit more of a surprise. CarCare Masters also pointed to the Chevrolet K5 Blazer from 1969 to 1972 as gaining serious traction, particularly with younger collectors. And they say it's because of that classic styling, the off-road capability, and just that nostalgia for cars from that era. And prices have apparently doubled in the last 5 years.
Yeah, the K5 Blazer, that's a cool truck.
It is. So why do you think we're seeing this resurgence of interest in classic SUVs?
Well, I think it's part of a bigger trend where people are looking for cars that are more utilitarian, something they can use for more than just going fast. And I think younger buyers, they're really drawn to that kind of rugged, outdoorsy lifestyle. And those early Blazers, they just have that cool factor.
Yeah, they look the part.
They do.
Okay, so on the flip side, CarCare Masters also shared what they're seeing loop value, or at least see a decrease in demand in the Dallas-Fort Worth market. And that includes some early 2000s modern classics like the R34 Nissan Skyline and the Dodge Viper GTS. Yeah, so their take is that some of those models are cooling off because of the current economic uncertainty, and maybe because there are just more of them available as they get older and people are moving on to other cars.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Not every performance car from that era is going to become a collectible.
Right. It's got to have that special something.
Exactly.
They also mention 1980s American muscle cars like the third generation Chevrolet Camaro and the Fox body Ford Mustang. And while those cars still have a dedicated fan base, the demand doesn't seem to be keeping up with the supply, and they're not fetching the same kind of prices as the earlier generations.
Yeah, those 80s muscle cars, it's a tricky market. They're more affordable than the older ones, but they made so many of them that they're not as rare.
Right. It's all about supply and demand.
It really is.
So lastly, CarCare Masters talked about some of the big trends that they're seeing in the market, and generational shifts are a big one. Baby boomers are downsizing their collections, and younger buyers are driving demand for those 80s, 90s, and early 2000s cars that they grew up with.
Yeah, makes sense.
And rarity and condition, those are still the most important factors. Low production, well-preserved, original condition cars, those are the ones that are going to command the highest prices. And restomods, those are continuing to gain popularity, taking a classic car and updating it with modern technology.
Yeah, restomods are really cool.
They are. And of course, the overall economic climate that plays a role as well. When times are uncertain, people tend to pull back on spending on things like collectible cars. Although the really desirable ones, they tend to hold their value pretty well.
Yeah, people are always going to want those boot chip cars.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to get these local insights from CarCare Masters. It really adds another layer to the national picture that we got from PistonHeads.
It does. And it just shows how complex this market is. There's so many factors at play.
Yeah, it's not just about, what's cool on Instagram.
Right. It's much deeper than that.
So bringing it all together, we've got a pretty good sense of what's going on in the classic and modern car market right now from PistonHeads. We saw that people are really drawn to that analog driving experience. Cars like the Peugeot 205 GTI are hot rarity and design are still huge factors. The Datsun 240Z is a good example of that. And Lamborghini, especially the Miura, that's a brand that just keeps going up in value. Yeah, Lamborghini's on fire. They are. And then in the modern classic world cars like the Renault Clio 182 and the Lotus Carlton, those are still holding strong. And the Ferrari Enzo, that's like the holy grail for a lot of collectors. You can't go wrong with an Enzo. You can't. And looking ahead, the Toyota GR Yaris and certain Porsche models, those are looking like good pets. And even cars that were maybe overlooked before, like the Jaguar XJS and the Lexus LFA, those are starting to get more attention. Yeah, it's cool to see those underdogs starting to get some love. It is, and it's important to remember that all of these trends, they're influenced by a lot of different things. Rarity, condition, the preferences of different generations of buyers, the economy. It's a complicated equation.
It really is. There's no crystal ball.
No, but that's part of what makes it so interesting, right?
Absolutely.
So here's a thought for you to chew on. What previously underappreciated car do you think might be the next big thing? And what factors might drive its value up in the future? It's something to keep in mind as you're out there looking at cars.
Yeah, it's always good to be ahead of the curve.
Absolutely. Now, if you happen to be in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and you've got a classic car that, needs some love, whether it's a full restoration or just some regular maintenance to keep it running smoothly, you should really check out CarCare Masters. These guys, they've been doing this for over 20 years. They know their stuff, and they're passionate about keeping these classic cars on the road. So whether you need an engine rebuild, some preventative maintenance, or a full concours level restoration, they can handle it. They've got the skills, the knowledge, and the dedication to do it right. So if you're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and you're looking for the best of the best when it comes to classic car mechanical restoration, be sure to check out CarCare Masters. You won't be disappointed.
That sounds like a great resource.
They are.
Well, thanks for all the insights.
Yeah, it's been a fun one.
It has. All right, we'll catch you next time.